thank you all for being here. My name is Dan Patt. I'm an Adjunct Fellow from the Hudson Institute Center for Defense Concepts and Technology. And I'm joined today by a distinguished panel. And let me start by introducing them. And I'll start with Michèle Flournoy. She doesn't really need an introduction, but nonetheless, I'll offer one up. She is co-founder and managing partner of West Exec Advisors, also co-founder and chair of the Center for New American Security. And she previously, of course, was the Undersecretary of Defense for Policy. Likewise, if you follow national security in the Hill, you already know Congressman Seth Moulton, representative from Massachusetts' 6th District. Seth is a former Marine who served 4 combat tours and now sits on the House Armed Services Committee, among other committees, and is very active on defense matters. And finally, we have the privilege of being joined by Jay Dreyer, the director of the Strategic Capabilities Office, or SCO, as it is known around town, a nimble agency that reports to the Deputy Secretary of Defense. Jay has a technical background with an advanced degree in engineering and previously held leadership positions in NASA in the Aeronautics Directorate. The title of our event today is called Transforming Defense for a Competitive Era. So that's what I hope to talk about, to just dive right in, talk about what our defense challenges are, competition, the nature of our current competition, and defense transformation. And I can't wait to dive right in with our panelists here. And Michèle, I'd like to start with you. You recently wrote a piece in the June issue of Foreign Affairs, and if those in our audience haven't read it, I can't recommend it highly enough. Your article, covered the challenges posed to the Department of Defense, the way the DoD operates, and offered up some ideas for change. Can you give us an overview of the situation that DoD's in, how we got here, and what we might hope to do about it?
Sure. Well, thanks for convening us. I'm looking forward to the conversation. So we are in a period of profound geopolitical changes and also technological disruption. And so we have a rising China and an increasingly multidimensional competition between the US and China. It has economic dimensions, technological dimensions, military dimensions, even ideological dimensions in terms of the competition between a more authoritarian system and our democracy. And so in this context, when the name of the game between, in this competition between these two nuclear powers is really deterring conflict. And if you look at what is going to be required for deterrence, we can't just rest on our laurels because we think we're the best military in the world, and we have been for a long time. We're really going to be challenged to have to think anew about the challenges that China will pose to us, the concepts of operations that we will need to be successful in deterring their aggression or rolling it back, the types of capabilities we need to invest in, and the technologies that we need to invest in, and the changes to our acquisition approach that are going to be necessary to do that at speed and at scale, and even down to our personal management systems of how we bring technical talent into the force, how we manage it, and allow it to lead and to help innovate in the department. So there's just a very rich agenda. And I guess I would just conclude by saying, what we do in the next 4 years will have a huge impact on our position in the world for the next 40. And so time is of the essence. There's a real sense of both urgency and consequence that I think we need to be operating with.
So over to you, Seth. Last year you co-chaired the Future of Defense Task Force, and you signed out its report. And there are definitely a few themes in that report that lined up with what Michèle just laid out, including that need for operational concept development, that focus on concepts that I want to return to in this discussion. But tell us a little bit about your findings from that task force, and then maybe highlight some of the initiatives that you're supporting or driving this year that might address those matters.
Well, first of all, Dan, let me tell you how great it is to be back at the Hudson Institute, and what an honor it is to be here with Michèle. Michèle, great to see you, and it's always a privilege to be on panels like this with you. The point of the bipartisan task force was to find some consensus on a long-term strategy to confront the threats that we face around the world. And there's no question that the number one threat is China. And there's also no question that we are currently losing the race to China. I mean, let me repeat that. If we stay on our current path, we will lose. Michèle said it herself in her article. Time is not on our side in this competition. We're losing ground every day that we don't change the way that we do business. And so based on that assessment, the task force made some key recommendations in this area. First, before we can invest as much as we need to in the future, we have to free up resources to do so. And for that reason, DoD has to retire systems and platforms that simply don't meet the current threat environment. We can't keep burning our resources on planes that were built for uncontested airspace like the A-10, or ships that were built without a mission like the LCS. So I'm working right now to help the department push back on the parochial interests of colleagues of mine in Congress to get those out of the way. Second, once we've freed up resources, we can then push them to emerging technologies like AI, artificial intelligence, and biotech. But that means we have to fix the way we buy those technologies, because right now we still buy things for the military the same way we did in the Vietnam War, with systems put in place from literally the industrial age. We used to buy hardware like ships and airplanes to win wars, and in the future, we're going to win wars with software. And you don't buy hardware and software the same way. Hardware you buy once, software is constantly evolving. You have to make sure it can get readily upgraded. And you need more flexibility with how you purchase it. So going back to my initial point, we're losing to China because it buys software and we're still buying hardware. So it's not enough to just change what we buy. We also have to change how we buy it. And to do all the things that I just described, we have to rely on our friends and partners in the private sector and in the international community. So this year, as I push forward on all these priorities with the NDAA, Chairman Smith has given his full support to the task force and is now working with us to make sure that these recommendations are actually put into practice. I've also been working with many people on this panel, so I'm looking forward to continuing the conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. And Jay, let's turn inside the department. Let's turn to your agency. And I know that you won't be able to talk a lot about what SCO does because of classification, but give us a sense of where SCO fits in the ecosystem of innovation, either on technology or concepts, and what is SCO doing to address some of these bigger picture challenges that Michèle and Seth introduced.
No, Dan, first of all, I'd like to also say just really what an honor it is to participate in a panel such as this. Truly is an honor, and looking forward to the discussion today. I'll also say the views expressed are mine and don't necessarily represent those of the Department of Defense. But that being said, within the Strategic Capabilities Office, our mission is to rapidly demonstrate, experiment, to prototype, to deliver game-changing strategic effects that are going to deter and, if necessary, defeat a near-peer adversary in all phases of conflict. So that's our mission. But the better way I would describe of what we do within SCO is we're a problem-solving organization. So you ask, where do we derive our priorities? What drives what we do is understanding the warfighter needs, and in particular with our COCOM partners. So we have a very close relationship, in particular with Indo-PACOM and with EUCOM, to the point where we actually have cells within the organization that sit in both of those units. And that helps us better understand the problem. And so when you ask where our priorities or what drives what we do, it's trying to find where can we make a difference? Where can we have impact? And within our charter, we lay out areas such as deterrence, cost imposition, and power projection, surprise, elements like this. This is what we need to measure against in order to exactly what was said by both Representative Moulton and Michèle. We've got an adversary that time is not on our side. And so the fortunate thing is this is an office that looks to how do we move things more rapidly and how do we get back to that problem solving approach in what we do. One thing I think what makes it unique and being able to take a look at from our perspective is we are service agnostic. So we don't come in with a lens either from a particular service, and at the same time, we're all domain. So we do work across air, land, sea, space, and cyber to apply that effect of how we're going to solve some of those particular problems. And I think that ability to integrate across domains, across services, it is a powerful component to bringing this fight to the adversary going forward. And so even though I've been on board just a year and a half, and quite a bit of that was under COVID, it really has been impressive to see how the organization has grown and continued to evolve. I will say, and you had alluded to it, a direct report to the Deputy Secretary, and Secretary Hicks has been a strong supporter, so I'm excited to see what we can do. But I'd also want to say, probably the thing I've noticed the most about being within this organization is the team is highly motivated and mission focused to do what we do. And I think that is key to being able to move forward.
Michèle, one of the things you've written about is the platform-centric tendency of the department, right? It's requirements generation, it's force design, often cast modernization as buying better versions of the systems we have today, as opposed to doing what Jay talked about, which is problem solving, or thinking creatively about how to conduct a mission or how to solve an operational challenge. And I'm interested in your perspective on this. One of the ideas you've introduced is product managers. Is that something that would help? And how do you resolve this, the connections you need between the people who have the operational problems or missions, the people who have the operational stakeholders like the combatant commands and the acquisition community, which tend to be aligned around services. How do you think about bringing those together, and what can we do about that? I think you want to check mute.
Sorry. One of the most important sets of activities that the department should be undertaking right now, and it is really in concept development, focused on specific problem sets in specific mission areas, and really competing different solutions conceptually, then taking some of those ideas into experimentation, and then working with an organization like the SCO to try to figure out, is this something that we can address by combining what's already in hand or mature in new ways to get new solutions, which is really the area that SCO specializes in. That's kind of the near to midterm. Or is this an area where we need to make a transformational long-term investment in a new technology, new set of capabilities, and we're going to have to wait a decade before we really have new answers to these problems? More often than not, it's going to be both. You're going to try to cobble together a near-term solution that enhances deterrence or your ability to defeat aggression using what you have in new and creative ways. And then you're also going to make investments that will improve your advantage in the future. But at the heart of this is this concept development experimentation. And I would just say, we have to remember, there are good historical precedents for this. I mean, if you look at the Germans in the interwar period, the technology for tanks, for air power, for a variety of things, communications existed, but it wasn't until the Germans did the concept development work to put it all together that you got Blitzkrieg. Another example is even in that same period, we had a Navy, a US Navy that was dominated by the battleship. And that was the prevailing view of what was going to win wars in the future. But the Navy consciously allowed and even encouraged in some ways an insurgency within that was wedded to aviation and figuring out how would aviation change the game. And thank God they did, because it was out of that work those concepts came in to really sort of help save the day in World War II. So creating an environment where you're really allowing, checking rank at the door, allowing the smartest, most creative people to come in, be at the table, and develop new concepts to address the hard problems, and competing those, experimenting with those, having those feedback into your prototyping and acquisition process. To me, that's the name of the game. And we just have to be, I see some signs that we're starting to move in that direction, but we're not cycling fast enough, and we're not resourcing the effort at the scale that we need.
My colleague, Brian Clark at the center, recently debuted some work on the concept of mission management, right? Recognizing that once service force generation organizations put together, they buy a system, they train the crews to operate that system. So that might be Air Force Long Range Strike, it might be a Navy Surface Action Group. Once they do that, you don't have other organizations down the road, further down range, further towards the combatant commander operational need, which can integrate them together. Nobody's responsible for that. There's a great tool set for it. And that sort of need for, we know how to do program management. We think about acquisition of weapon system programs, but it feels like that in addition to developing operational concepts, thinking about the mechanisms that we pull things together to support those operational concepts, thinking about how we do oversight around mission outcomes and not just program outcomes, is an area that's also ripe for experimentation and creativity. And Congressman, I understand that you're supporting a legislative concept this cycle that drives at similar issues. What can you share about that?
Sure. So as I mentioned earlier, we can't just change what we buy. We also have to change how we buy it. Software is going to win wars. So we need to change our buying habits so that we can buy software, because you just don't buy it the same way that you buy hardware. And that means we have to have more flexible, quick funding that directly addresses the operational challenges our troops are facing, or meets the needs of these new operational concepts that Michèle is talking about developing. So that's why I'm working to establish what we're calling a mission-based pilot, which would experiment with a new way of budgeting to fix these issues. The mission-based pilot would restructure funding so that it's tied to specific missions instead of specific hardware. So picture this: instead of buying a single piece of hardware, say a fighter jet, and forcing it to address multiple missions over the years, spending billions of dollars fixing it, only deploying it decades after we wrote requirements for it. I mean, if this doesn't sound familiar, we're talking about the F-35 here, folks. We could just define an operational challenge that our troops are facing right now, assign funding to it, and quickly buy a flexible range of solutions that might help address it. And I think that's really the approach that China is taking here. They have an operational goal. They don't have a lot of rules or restrictions on how they're going to reach that goal, whereas we just always buy gadgets. I mean, the F-35 is, to me, one of the best examples here. I mean, we've spent years and decades really, billions of dollars developing the most expensive aircraft in world history to fight China, and it can't reach China. So we're wasting a lot of money. And, what's the point of buying one super expensive piece of hardware to address a problem if it takes literally years to get it out into the field? So, the troops are saying, hey, our house is on fire, and we have a system that requires a 2-year system of approvals at a minimum to allow them to purchase a hose. So it's just not working. And I think that's why the mission-based pilot is so important. We need to buy for the needs of today, not for the needs of 10 years ago. And we believe that the SCO could play an important role in this, given their experience with these issues. So this is something we're really looking forward to working with them on as we develop this pilot and hopefully get to test it by getting it approved through this year's NDAA.
Can I just jump in on this one point? I think along with what Seth's talking about in terms of a pilot, having greater flexibility from Congress to allow the department to manage portfolios of capability according to mission area would be huge. I mean, I don't know a single CEO trying to run a major business that doesn't do quarterly portfolio reviews and look at, okay, what's not working, and I should do some divestment. What is working, or it's even better than I thought it would be, and I want to double down and speed that up, accelerate the progress. the fact that the department is so hamstrung in its ability to manage across its investment portfolio for a given mission is really challenging. And I know that Congress doesn't want to lose the power of the purse. They don't want to lose their oversight. But I think there are ways to do this that would keep Congress informed, ensure their oversight, but give the department a little bit more flexibility to manage money across mission portfolios, which would be hugely helpful to accelerating the progress that we need to make to deal with China.
Michèle, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, what Congress should be doing is asking the question, are we meeting the mission requirements here? Are we making progress towards that goal? As opposed to just saying, hey, are we checking the box next to this milestone in a program that we kind of defined a decade ago?
Yeah, that's very interesting. This notion of shifting the lens on oversight from hitting program requirements and milestones to shifting the lens to maybe mission outcomes or portfolio progress against a mission. And I want to return to that in just a moment and maybe ask about the role of the resource allocation process in that. But first, before we lose that thread on operational challenges, Jay, how does scope play in the space of operational challenges? And especially given that, it's the services which have, the weapon systems and maintain them and operate them. And how does scope balance the relationships with program acquisition and the people responsible for operations?
No, that's an excellent point, Dan. So it really starts with what I described in the earlier question, with understanding the problem set that we have from our COCOM partners. But at the same time, we realize often the solution to these operational challenges are in the seams, in whether it's between domains or between services. And it goes back to what I said, by being service agnostic, to be able to look, I say, more holistically at the problem space. That puts SCO in a really good position to help address some of these challenges, some of these opportunities, if you will, to really bring a solution to bear, and not becoming enamored with a particular system right off the bat. And that, I think, is too often what we have, within our system today, is we become very platform focused instead of looking at systems of how is the interoperability work, across things in order to accomplish a mission, so to speak. So I think that's a key thing, is being that joint element that brings it together, and that extends to our partners and allies as well. So that's not just within the department. The other thing I'd like to highlight on, I think that's critical here in this discussion, is we tend to focus so often on the technology itself. And yes, obviously SCO is a technical organization, and we work to advance these technical capabilities. But I think just as important, it's what we do to also advance or experiment within the tactics, the techniques, and the procedures. The how we use the equipment is often more important than the equipment itself when we think about it. And also, what is the role in this experimentation, this learning, again, not to just understand the technical capabilities or how we use it, but how it may also serve as a role to inform policy moving forward. And do that as part of the experimentation, look at things more holistically that way. So in this case, I think joint experimentation is a key to what we do within SCO. We view it as a learning opportunity, again, across technical, across the tradecraft piece, if you will, and the policy side. The other element that's, I think, essential here is being threat informed in what we do. And so by forming the relationship that we have with the intelligence community within the organization is an important aspect for us to be able to accomplish our mission. Now, so I talked a bit about our relationship with the COCOMs, and you asked about, well, how do the services fit in? How do we actually make this work to be able to transition something, to put a capability in the warfighter's hands? So the first key to that is, quite frankly, working with the services at the beginning of the problem. We don't wait until we've developed a capability and try to push that within the services, but it's really from day one, even in that problem definition step, that we're engaging across the services to understand the potential for us to integrate, a new capability. And how we do this, it really takes several forms on how we might work through this. So some cases, it may be just modifying an existing system. And in many cases, that's an easy transition. Future lots or buys will almost inherently include this new capability. On the other hand, we serve a role, and I'll say, in integrating disparate systems, bringing them together to provide an interaction in the sense that was never originally designed to do, but creates completely new capabilities within the services. So we've got a good track record of doing that. And then, of course, developing new capabilities as well, and something that really is brand new. So we really work across that entire spectrum. But at the end of the day, it comes back to being operationally focused on what we're trying to do. But that integration and how we work with the services, I'll touch on that just a little bit more. It's more than just engaging and working with them from the beginning, but it's all throughout the process. And I'm going to use one example of an area that we've worked is, we call it Ghost Fleet. This is the work that we've done on enabling or pioneering the greater use of autonomous large surface vessels within the Navy. This isn't a case where SCO develops a concept and then turns it over to the Navy at some point. We've been working hand in hand with the service throughout this process and sharing in that learning. I mean, this is what comes forward in the experimentation that we talked about. And so this is a case where that happens almost naturally when you have an organization that is used to working with others within the services. So when we did the move of these ships from the Gulf of Mexico over to the West Coast, the Navy was involved every step of the way. So that this is what we talk about, operationalizing some of these concepts early in the process, and they've been great partners in this.
That's really useful perspective, and I think the effort that it takes to do that kind of integration and outreach, right, is clearly so important. It clearly takes a lot of energy, but it's really hard to get to joint outcomes without that kind of background facilitation work.
Absolutely. One of the things that I've said is how do you think about joint transition is a really hard problem for us, and something I think that we really need to grapple and move forward, because it's easy to think, and we've been designed to think along service lenses. So when we think on a more mission-based capability, how do you transition those capabilities across service? We have some good examples where that's happened, but I'll say it's not always easy.
Yeah. Michèle, you brought up this sense of, when we have challenges, that in the near term, we're left with cobbling things together and thinking about their creative employment. And in the longer term, we might want to, create new technologies, create new systems that help, change the game for those missions or other missions. Earlier this year, right, in March of this year, Phil Davidson, who was then the Indo-Pacific commander, suggested that China might seek to take Taiwan by force in as soon as 6 years. And this is a major focus of DoD scenario-based planning. And it's no secret, right, that our acquisition system doesn't respond really quickly. It takes a year or more to do requirements, a couple of years to budget, and then yet longer to develop in field systems. Given that pacing, if that's the case, if the DoD needs to transform on the timeline of 6 years, how do we do that? How do we fight better? I mean, we've talked about operational concept development. We've talked about the experimentation. You've introduced a few ingredients, right, which is more flexible funding, possibly some different oversight mechanisms. But how do we move that to action? How do we pull this off to really make these new operational concepts real?
Yeah, so I think the only way that China moves on Taiwan in the next 5 to 7 years is if there's a massive miscalculation. And the first element of that would be underestimating our resolve. So the first thing we have to do is clarify, we have to show up in the region consistently, diplomatically, militarily, in a bilateral basis, multilateral basis. We have to show up, and we have to be clear that we're there. We see how we define our interests, what we're willing to defend and protect. And then I think we need to use our deployments and our exercises to demonstrate our capability, that, we do have the ability to either deny the success of Chinese aggression or impose very high costs along with our allies in the region. So allies and partners become important in demonstrating unity on this issue. And then, we need to really make sure that organizations like SCO are doing the work that needs to be done to make sure we have some better options in that near to midterm timeframe, by combining what we have or mature technologies that we have, in new ways, for example, to be able to hold large segments of the Chinese naval fleet at risk, just to remind them that there would be tremendous cost if they did try, either a blockade or an invasion of Taiwan. So these are all things we can do in the near term, even as we make some big bets and invest in the more transformational capabilities that will, we could see coming online in the next decade and beyond. So, but this is a really critical part of the agenda for DoD. But it's not just what we buy. It's how how we communicate our resolve, how we demonstrate our resolve, the concepts and experiments we do to underline that, and then how we put our existing capabilities together in new ways to give us, a greater advantage.
Yeah, you mentioned a little earlier the need for flexibility and the right kind of congressional oversight to enable some of the experimentation that's needed, and use the historical analogies of developing new concepts of operation and how transformational those were in prior eras. What role does the DoD's resource allocation system, its programming, planning, budgeting, and execution system, play in setting the incentives or the ability of the department to prioritize that kind of activity? Does that have a role, and how does that also drive oversight?
Yeah, no, I think the current system is very sequential and very rigid. Once something's in the program, it is pretty much set in stone unless it fails. And we've modeled this on the Ford Motor Company approach to business and acquisition from the 1950s. So we take years to define requirements, and then we go through this cascade of milestones to ultimately acquisition, and it's designed to really keep big platform programs, complicated programs on schedule and on cost, or on budget. It is not designed to incentivize innovation and rapid adoption of innovation. And so what I've suggested is, I'm not talking about blowing up the whole acquisition system, because it does what it does, and we need that. What I am suggesting is that we train a cadre of what I call the sort of special forces of acquisition, who are, expert in the agile development process, the iterative agile development process for software-defined systems and many other emerging technologies, and that they are incented and rewarded to move quickly, fail fast, learn, reinvent, succeed, disrupt programs with better solutions, and that they are actually trained to do that. They're rewarded in doing that. They're promoted. They have a career path for doing that. And that would create some new behaviors in our acquisition system that I think would be much more, that would assist the adoption of innovation, that would help us, speed and scale that process.
Yeah, that's really interesting, and a compelling idea. And Congressman, along those lines, right? Michèle just introduced this notion of a special forces of acquisition, right? Inherently agile, able to deal with development and operations simultaneously. But how does Congress come along to that, right? So many of the stereotypes of Congress are also locked into this industrial era oversight system of, here's a program element, here's the district that this physical system is made in, and there's a long-term stability that comes with that. Are we on cost and schedule targets like you hinted at before? How do DoD and Congress come together on this, right? If it's hard for DoD to transform, isn't it even harder for those two bodies to come together? How do we get there?
Well, look, of course, it's challenging, and I think what Michelle has laid out is a way to get there that's not completely blowing up the entire system or rocking the entire boat. I'm honestly a little bit more on the side of we need to blow up the whole system here, because the reality is that yes, we still will have some big clunky industrial era type weapon systems that we need to keep on cost and on budget. But I think that increasingly the majority of the acquisitions that we need to be making will be these more agile, mission oriented types of technologies, fulfilling totally new operational concepts and things that we get often right off the shelf in the private sector very quickly and have to adopt with a lot of flexibility and adapt as they come along. One of the things we mentioned in the task force report, the Future Defense Task Force report, is that the best way to start is, rather than, as Michelle says, blowing up the entire system, just really try to focus an effort on the parts of DoD, the programs within DoD that are working. So, I think we need to end up farther as an end goal, but I think that we're completely aligned in terms of the way we need to start out to change the system. And I think that it's true. You'll certainly hear people on the Hill saying, "Oh, we're losing oversight if we change the way that we buy for the military." But the truth of the matter is that the current system doesn't really give us the oversight that we need anyway. We're sort of circling the drain with this system where DoD describes in intricate detail the ways that it isn't buying effectively. Congress sort of signs off on that oversight, and then we just keep going in circles. We have enough oversight to tell us all the ways that the F-35 program is messed up, for example, but has that actually helped anyone? Have we been really agile in fixing it? I think that's a whole other question. So we need to fix this whole budgeting and acquisition system that's fundamentally broken. And my hope is that with this mission-based pilot, we might find a way to keep the oversight, but have it focused on the things that matters. Let's conduct oversight on making progress towards an operational goal, fulfilling a new operational concept or a new mission requirement in on milestones that were put in place in this very tired, old-fashioned industrial model kind of way of keeping track of programs. So, as a member of Congress, I can keep DoD accountable by asking that they show us how the money that they spend in a mission-based funding bucket actually meets the mission. And if it's not meeting the mission, then we can dive into more detail and determine what do they need to change about how they're spending this money, often just within this, this mission requirement to get it done. It just doesn't do us any good if Congress sets burdensome over bureaucratic requirements on the department that don't actually help us address the operational challenges that we face.
Can I just jump in on one point? You're losing control of your panel here, but I want to applaud something that Congress has done recently. There's lots of color of money problems. There's R&D money, there's testing money, there's procurement money, and then there's operational money. And recently, Congress has allowed the department much greater flexibility on cybersecurity to have one color of money that can go across those areas, and that's really important. And I think we're going to need it in other areas as well. In a world where you're going to have mission, critical capabilities being provided as a service, cybersecurity as a service, data analytics as a service, AI as a service, not just product procurement. We've got to figure out the color of money barriers to enabling us to get the best that's out there commercially into the department as a service, as opposed to thinking everything in terms of procuring product.
I think that's really well stated, and I think I really like that connection of if we're going to do this more experimentation, if we're going to mix development and operations, right, that cascades all the way back through essentially our accounting system and our control and oversight system. So that makes a lot of sense to me. Jay, try to leave you with the last word, and you can give us an uplifting note. Are there examples that you can offer, obviously within the limits of this forum, about things SCO has done that maybe hints that there is a possibility of generating new capability, new operational concepts sooner rather than later, and actually affecting operations and outcomes. And if you've done it, how did you do it?
No, happy to talk on that. Unfortunately, like you alluded to, there's a limit to really what I can say, just due to the nature of the work that we do, and that's actually a good news thing. Let me start by saying a little bit about how we even operate within SCO. Is we try to not just silo things within individual projects, and not even just work across portfolios, but how do we work across the entire effort within SCO to look for those opportunities, I'll say, to think in a more system manner. And again, not just being bounded within the SCO portfolio, but it goes back to something I highlighted before, how we integrate with how the services already are functioning, or where we see them going in the future to do that even better. So part of that is the mindset, I think, in how we do that. Another key to that success is how we demonstrate these capabilities. We use the term, experimentation quite a bit. So in some cases, this may be out on the range, but we also look for those opportunities where we can integrate into ongoing exercises, for example, to understand how this new capability might play in that larger suite of the joint force moving forward. So that type of experimentation is really powerful to us. And with that, I'll say I've talked a bit about the COCOM relationship and how we work with the services. What I haven't said is or had a chance to talk about yet, is how we work with others. And I'll use the term the innovation ecosphere, if you will. And that working across other organizations has really been key to our success. I think it's easy to say no one organization, no single service can do this alone. We have to work together as a team and able to do this. And I'll pick on Ghost Fleet as a good example before that I alluded to on the autonomous ships. This was a capability with some of the initial technologies in the autonomy and the perception were developed by DARPA. We then took those technologies and operationalized them within SCO. And just like I talked before, this is where we're working with the service and we're really moving this forward toward a capability that's going to be a part of the future force. At the same time, though, we're taking the learning from this experimentation and not just feeding it to the service, but feeding it back down to organizations like DARPA. So the next generation of systems, the new technologies that we're developing and building can be built, upon this knowledge that we're gaining, that we're learning within this experimentation. So that's been key to it. Another example I would like to throw out is, in addition to, like I said, testing on the range or testing in exercises, getting things in the hands of warfighters as soon as possible has been key to what we've done. And Representative Moulton mentioned, software is a good example of this. So one of the tools that we have developed we call IKE, and think of it as a visualization of the cyber battlefield, able to bring, a collection of data and information to the warfighter's hands that he or she didn't have before, or enabled to perform their mission. So in doing this, while we were developing it, we were spinning out early versions of this product to the warfighter. And it does two things. It gets new capability in their hands so that they can actually employ it, which is what was happening, but also at the same time for us to learn as part of that process. I mean, think about it. We see it in the civil sector all the time with beta development or testing of tools and software as it's being developed. That makes us smarter about the end product that we're ultimately working toward. And we mentioned and used the term requirements before. Sometimes I think we spend too much time up front trying to get the perfect set of requirements. We spend forever building to it to find that those are now out of date, or maybe we didn't have the right requirements to begin with. So another secret to, I think, to our success is we don't view ourselves as validating requirements, but rather informing them. And again, it's more than just technical, but how it also affects how we use it and the policies that surround it. That needs to be part of that learning. The other key there, though, is as part of that learning, we have to be able to take risk in what we do. And I think that's something that is inherent within the SCO. Not everything we do is going to be successful as we originally foresaw or planned, but that is part of the learning process. And often the things that don't work, we can sometimes learn just as much when we're doing when we find some of those cases as when we're very successful in doing this. So having that mentality where it's okay to understand or challenge to the unknown, I think is important. If not, we're not going to push the state of the art and take risk that we need to, or it's going to take forever to develop a capability, and by then it's going to be obsolete. And really, if you were to summarize this all in another way of maybe describing it, is something that Michèle pointed out in her paper as well. It's the culture that exists within the organization. And I alluded to this before, in my early remarks about a team that's very mission focused in what they do. That's been essential. I think people come to work and they have that their mindset on their job is to do what they can to defeat the adversary. When they come to work, when they leave, their day is focused on that and how we do it better and how we find some of those creative solutions. So what we can do within our organization to maintain that culture, I think is key. And then finally, if I were to say that the final key to success is not unique just to SCO, but I think it's really a theme, if you will, of this entire panel is it comes down to something I view as a very something that we hold dear as Americans is teamwork. And at the end of the day, we are all on the same team when we're approaching this problem, whether we look at the federal government, both from a congressional or executive side, and extending to the civil sector as well. How we work together because of the daunting challenge that we face, it's just inherent with what we have to do to be able to be successful.
Thanks for that, Jay. And with that, I think we will wrap up on that high note. And I, for one, share a sense of appreciation for the mission focus of this panel. Really an honor to be on here with all of you. And I, for one, am really deeply appreciative of your collective thoughts, your energy, and your action on the kinds of topics that we've talked about today.
Well, thanks for pulling us together and great discussion.
Yeah, thanks very much.
Yeah, really appreciate the opportunity.